Hello and welcome to episode 55 of Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast. I am joined once again by Hannah Davis. Hannah, welcome back.
Hello.
So we didn't get time last time to talk about probably the juicier bits of the story to do with your son Jasper. We talked a lot in the last episode about his diagnosis or eventual diagnosis, and I imagine we'll get to that in a bit later on as well. Um, and we talked a lot about how he is now, what he's doing now, how he's so sporty, and how he's thriving academically. But today we are going to go through the legal fight, I guess, that you had a long legal fight that you had with the NHS. And I won't spoil the outcome for everybody at the moment. They will have to listen towards the end. There'll be no spoilers. Um, but yeah, the long legal fight you had with the NHS, your fight for Jasper, really, and fight for advocacy. So we ended the last episode. I know we sort of skipped ahead a little bit in time, so we'll take it back really to you've been through the diagnosis, eventual diagnosis. You've had multiple hospital visits and lots of illness and gone to all manner of different hospitals. Um, when did you start to think, actually, I really want some sort of recompense or some sort of apology or something from the NHS?
It was, it all kind of started when we actually got the diagnosis, and I was so angry at the team at Brighton, in particular, that one surgeon. um, I really had it in my head that he had personally caused Jasper 2 years more pain and sort of failure. Well, they called Jasper failure to thrive, and he, in my head, he had personally caused that, and I'm sure that's not the case. It's the system, yada yada. But I was like, I want him to say sorry. So I emailed the hospital, addressed it to him, emailed basically any email address I could find that would get to him. So like there was a pediatric one, there was a gastro one, there was an A&E one. So I was like firing off these emails, just saying like in a friendly but firm way. So ignore my puppy over there. In a friendly but firm way, you wrongly made a choice that day, and this is how it's impacted my son's life. I want you to know that that decision you made on that day to not give him a biopsy for something that we had been sent to you for, underlined in the ambulance notes, Hirschsprung's biopsy question mark. Your choice to not do that has cost my son 2 years, 2.5 years of agony. And I want you to know you were wrong, basically. And so I fired off these emails, and I got a reply saying that he hadn't done anything wrong. Really sorry for Jasper's diagnosis, but no, we followed the nice guidelines. We did nothing wrong. And I was like, you are kidding. Like, to me, it's so black and white. We went to you for a Hirschsprung's biopsy. You didn't do it and said he didn't have Hirschsprung's and he would be fine. He has Hirschsprung's and he hasn't been fine. Like, to me, it was so black and white. So I obviously, then he had annoyed me. So I then emailed his boss, and his boss said, no, he did nothing wrong. Sorry that this happened to Jasper, but no, we followed the guidelines, and it would have been reckless of us to do a biopsy. Well, I think we can argue that probably isn't the case. So then I was like, at this point, steamingly angry, go to ombudsman, which is something I didn't know existed. My mum and dad being like, you can speak to the like health ombudsman. So I did that, wrote everything that had happened, and the ombudsman came back and said, no, he did nothing wrong. And at that point, I was like, am I just like shouting into an empty echo chamber? Like, to me and my family, it was so clear so obvious. Plus, we had had someone from St George's being like, you do know that this is like gross negligence. You could sue the NHS for this. And me being like, oh, well, I didn't even know, like I was 26. Like I didn't know this is a thing. Um, and I spoke to like my parents are quite not worldly, that might makes them sound cultured. They're a bit cultured, but they're like quite clued up on things. And they're very nice. Like my parents are quite generic Surrey conservatives. That just paints a picture, which is exactly my parents for all of their sins. They voted Brexit. I know they're still my parents. I have to still love them, but you know, they're those people. And they were like, when you sue the NHS, it's not you're not suing a hospital, you're suing the trust of NHS. And they literally, my dad was like, they literally have an entire budget for being sued. Like you're not going to take away from patients on the floor. You're not going to like there is entire teams and pots of money that basically pay people off. Um, and he was like, so don't, because I was like, you know, the NHS, yes, they made a bad choice, but they also saved Jasper's life and they stopped his bowel from bursting and they have done this stoma, which has totally changed my son for the better. So it was quite a conflicted process, and it all goes back to had they have just said sorry, we won't do it again in the future. What we'll do is we won't just follow these stupid nice guidelines. We will look at more cases, more like just done something. Literally just said like, sorry, we got it wrong. We'll learn from this because really, I just didn't want other parents, other children to go through what we had gone through for the 2.5 years. So that was kind of my head. And I just kept saying, I was like, I just want them to say sorry. Like, all I want is for them to say sorry. Like, to me, that's such a big deal. And I just wanted them to know they got it wrong. It's okay to get things wrong. Like, that happens. We're humans. But you need to learn from that. And the fact that they were so walls up, we didn't do anything wrong. We're not saying sorry and we're not changing what we did. To me, I was like, you're just going to do it to loads of other kids then. Like, that's kind of where my head was at. So then we spoke to my brother-in-law on John's side, who is older and wiser. And I still don't really know what his job is, but he does something to do with legal stuff. And they had sued the NHS, which I didn't know, years prior from when my niece was born. And they basically like scarred my niece loads. I think that's what had happened. Like there was something had happened with my niece. So he was like, yeah, you totally could. Like, this is the firm that I'm either consulting with or working with or something. I've spoken to them. They want to talk to you. So I was like, okay. So I spoke to I'm going to say owner of a law firm. I'm sure they're like a lawyer or they have like a title, but the person whose law firm was named after him. He called me and was like, hey, I've spoken to like your brother-in-law. Do you want to tell me like what's happened? So I basically recounted our podcast number one
Right.
to this guy and went through everything. And he was like, I mean, you definitely have a case. He was like, this is mad, basically, again, that they hadn't said sorry. And I was like, thank you. Like somebody is on the same page as me. So then we were like, well, let's sue the fuckers, was basically where it got to. Purely, like I didn't obviously when you sue someone, you're like, woohoo, I'm going to be rich. That is not the case, and we are not rich. But I just desperately wanted them to admit that they had done something wrong. That was like I just had it in my head. I was solely focused on this. And given I had a newborn, I had a kid that was, I think at this stage, Jasper had had his reversal as well. So we had waited a long time. And I was like, you know what? Yes. Like, I think the Ombudsman is wrong. I think they are wrong. And other people that work in the NHS also think they are wrong. I'm going to basically prove a point, which is a terrible thing to do, but I'm a Scorpio and that's in my mentality.
Oh, I think you.
um,
I think you have to. I think the thing that sort of strikes me, or the word that strikes me, then when you said about going through the chain of command and going through the surgeon, then his boss, then the ombudsman, is arrogance. I think that's the word that really sticks out to me. It's kind of like, no, go away. We did nothing wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. I might be paraphrasing a little bit
no,
there, but
no, that's
um,
totally. He's the same guy that had written in Jasper's medical notes over cautious first time parent. I've said they need apple juice. It was the same guy, and I was like, no,
no, no,
basically
exactly,
no.
exactly, and I think it can really stick with you when you go, actually, all I want, because all you said, all you want is an apology or acknowledgement or something. And
I want
if
them to learn.
absolutely, absolutely, and you just don't want it happening to anybody else. You know,
No,
if you by doing this can change something either in their mentality or in their practices, that 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, somebody else comes in presenting with Hirschsprung symptoms or similar symptoms to Jasper,
yeah,
and they go, "Oh, actually, we don't really want to get sued again. Um,
yeah.
we're going to do this," and it makes them think twice. Then
That's
I think
it. It's the thinking
it's
twice.
yeah, I think it is very much worth it. And it's like you said, when you're speaking to your parents, it's not about going after the NHS or, you
No.
know, taking away from potential care because
Hmm.
they're funding a
They can
legal
support
case.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I think that's absolutely right because at the end of the day, it's about doing the right thing. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a lot of what it comes down to.
Yeah. It was. It was a real like. It was conflicted. It is definitely conflicted, and we talked about it a lot, numerous times, with numerous people, including medical professionals, um, who were like, "Oh, honestly, we don't even." And I was like, "Will there be like a black mark against his name for further care?" And they were like, "No, like we have no idea who sues everyone." And they were like, "Often we do say to people like, you know, you should go further with this." And they were like, it is a learning. Like she was like, they need to know, the person that told us to do it at St. George's was like, they need to understand that this is wrong. Like it's so black and white. And that's what had kind of reinforced me being like, it is black and white. And the fact that even the ombudsman was like, nah, it's like, how are we so on different pages? Like I have no idea how the inner workings of the NHS work. And I know they have many positives and many flaws. We all know that. But I can't pretend I know how all of that works. So it was a bit, yeah, it was conflicted. But then I spoke to these lawyers who I wouldn't recommend, they weren't great. But I spoke to them and they were like, yeah, okay, let's crack on. Can you pay up front? And I was like, no. Um, so we did no win, no fee, which again means, our lot, my lot at the end would get minimal cash. And I was like, I don't care. Like, I've never in my life been money driven at all. Like, if I won the lottery, you'd have no idea. Like, I'd still have a shitty car and live in an all right house. Like, I'm not wired like that. Um, so I was like, yeah, fine, let's do this. Like, I don't care how we do it. I can't afford to pay you on a monthly retainer because you guys are really expensive. Let's just fight. So it started and it was a really, really, really long process. Took probably 2.5 years. I found it quite draining because our legal team didn't really understand what Hirschsprung's was. They didn't understand what was normal with Hirschsprung. So they were trying to sue them for him having 25% of his intestine removed. And I was like, no, that's not it. Like I kind of felt like they weren't listening. So I felt, having in my mind trained as a nurse to look after my son, I feel like I then trained as a lawyer to look after our legal team. So I got his medical notes, so you can access your medical notes, your child's medical notes, whenever you like. So I went to our GP and said, I would like these. You don't have to give a reason. I didn't give a reason. They didn't ask. They were like, yeah, fine. Got this like a floppy disk. No, not floppy disk, a CD disk, which I then couldn't use on my Mac. So then I had to try and like walking around being like, who has this old tech?
Who uses a CD anymore?
Yeah,
I wouldn't know where to put a CD into.
So then I got it all and I printed it all. And honestly, the notes that you get, like Jasper's file was like this thick. I looked at it and was like, we have calls 111 quite a lot of times. Every 111 call is recorded in there. It's all typed up. Every GP appointment, like literally every interaction with the NHS is written down, which is both helpful and overwhelming. And that's when I saw our medical notes for like the guy at Brighton, who I do not like, had written like, oh, worried first time parents. Oh, and it was quite eye-opening, some of the things, because I guess they probably think we might not ever see what they write. So it's like they're always professional, but always quite to the point. So there was a few of like over concerned new mother and things like that, and it's like, oh, now you've really pissed me off. So it just kind of added fuel to the fire, really. And I went through everything. I highlighted all of the bits that I thought were key. So things like the fact in our A&E notes, in our ambulance notes, it had said, from the lovely lady at Royal Surrey, it had said Hirschsprung's ? Biopsy underlined. And it's like, to me, that was quite key in the case, that another gastro specialist had sent us in an ambulance for one reason and one reason only. So all of these things, and I'd kind of made notes of dates, sent everything over to the legal team. And I think they were also quite overwhelmed by the paperwork. Oh, don't eat my Christmas decorations, Winnie. No. She's going to eat that bauble. And then, yeah, so they looked through it, and then they needed to get an opinion of another medical professional. So they were like, these are the surgeons, like the pediatric gastro surgeons that we're looking at. Like, what hospitals basically haven't you been to? Because you need to make it as like not linked as possible. So we found a chap who was at Southampton Hospital, and he knew obviously what Hirschsprung's was, and he was happy to look at the case. And then he came back with quite a wishy-washy reply, and I was like, you guys have asked him the wrong questions. Like this, you're asking things that are about Hirschsprung's, not about delayed diagnosis. So I kind of went through and was like, this is what you need to know. These nice guidelines, which anyone who goes to task with the NHS will be given, these nice guidelines are basically, it gives you, or gives the NHS team a sort of a list to follow. So it's like, does the child do this? Does the child do this? It's like a tick list to then decide on how you treat that child. So these are the nice guidelines that had apparently been followed. So I was like, I found the nice guidelines and was like, these are the nice guidelines that they say they followed. Here is proof on every single one of them that they did not follow the nice guidelines. And I was like, these are what you need to be asking this random surgeon man. So they went back and asked him all the questions that I had kind of pushed for. And he then came back and was like, yes, it was gross negligence. You're right. Like, this is as is. And then we had to wait some time to see, obviously with Hirschsprung's, it's such a roller coaster and you never quite know what you're going to get. So we then had to wait for some time to see how Jasper's Hirschsprung develops, how he develops as a little boy, what we can put his symptoms and what's happened to him down to Hirschsprung's, or what we can put down to late diagnosis. Because it is not the NHS's fault that he has Hirschsprung's. It is not their fault that he had a stoma. None of that. Had he have had early diagnosis when birth, he might not have needed a stoma. We don't know because they're on a milk-based diet. Obviously, he was on food at this point, which is quite rock and roll. So it's all of these things, and it was kind of separating out. And I felt like I did a lot of the legwork with that, with sort of my family being like, well, here's the paperwork. What do you think? What would you put here? You know, our lawyers keep going for Hirschsprung's related things because they're more, oh my God, he needed to have a stoma, or oh my God, you removed his intestine because of your mistake. And it's like, no, 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 no. Like trying to constantly sort of or compartmentalize things. And then what else did they get? Oh, I had to send them images. They pushed back on quite a few things. So things like, why had I waited like years to sue them? Which I thought was ironic given how many times I'd gone to hospital and been ignored. And obviously at this time I also had a newborn. So I had a kid who was a toddler with a stoma. I then had a newborn. I then had a kid that had reversal. The reversal then had gone wrong and he was incredibly unwell. And when you got those medical notes, that was terrifying. That was proper knocking on death's door. Also, he was then starting school and we were in COVID times. So it was like, you're asking me why this is taking a while. Like, are you kidding me? And then there was pushback on things like the time we had gone to Brighton in the ambulance, then that 2 weeks where we were still under Brighton, we hadn't been discharged, and he had that kind of head to toe covered in poo at our friend's house. All of that, they were like, well, have you got proof? Like, we need proof that he was poorly in that 2 weeks, and then the surgeon signed him off saying he was thriving. What proof have you got that he wasn't? And I was like, I have firstly documented Jasper's Hirschsprungs on social media. So I have got stories saved on highlights in our archive. My husband does as well. I've also got like voice notes to my mum, which obviously everything is time and date stamped and you can't like falsify, or maybe you can with like Photoshop or something, but I'm not skilled in that way. So I was like, okay, leave it with me. I'm like a fucking dog with a bone. I will find anything. I found like messages to my granny in Australia detailing what had happened. There was messages between me and my mum. I then was obviously talking to my friend whose house it was, and I was like, can you look back? Have I texted you about it? She was finding things where she had been like, honestly, don't worry. How is he doing now? Has he pooed more? Like all of these questions insinuating something had happened. I went to like all of my best friends and was like, can you look between these dates and these dates on your WhatsApps and see if we've mentioned anything, if we've talked to you about it? So they were then sending things. It was like a real sort of team effort, like friends and family, like John's family, even John's like sister who works in the NHS, like all of these people had then sent things through, which was so helpful. Like honestly, we needed it. Everything again, time and date stamped. So it's like there's no way, if all of this communication happened within that 2 weeks around Jasper's illness, are you then insinuating that I have gone to the surgeon and told him that he's been fine for the past 2 weeks? When literally there's me messaging being like, we're going to go see that guy in 2 weeks, so we'll let him know and he'll hopefully help us. And it's like, are you really then saying that I've gone there and been like, yeah, he's fine, nothing happened, he didn't poo everywhere and literally swim in it? Like, of course I would have said. So that really helped. And there were a few other instances where the NHS had pushed back saying, oh no, we had this 6 months where he was thriving. And it's like, okay, so we go back to that 6 months. And I guess for anyone trying to sue anyone, it's really difficult now because everything is logged. So it's like, okay, so scroll back. No, this is what happened. Annoyingly, I'd got a new phone at some point in this case, but my friends hadn't. So they still had the one-way conversations. So it was like, oh, okay, this, 6 months where nothing happened. We were in this hospital. We went to this GP. Here we are talking to 111. Here we are doing this. Like there was never more than probably 3 weeks where we didn't need any medical intervention. And it was all, there was a paper trail. So I then kind of built this folder of times and dates, and I was putting everything in it to make it really organized. And they were me and sticky notes were like this, and went back to them and were like, "This is everything." Gave it again to that surgeon who was consulting on the case, and he was like, "Oh my god, like, right, this is what we need to go to them with." So I think we went to them with 8 counts of negligence. So it wasn't just Brighton Man. I would argue it was, but they were like, you were let down by the GP right at the beginning. You were let down by Royal Surrey because you'd been there so many times, and at any point they could have referred you a second time, and they didn't. And I love our local hospital, and I think they were put between a rock and a hard place. But yeah, on paper they could have. But I do understand they were. Well, I certainly feel like they were trying, but they got cut in. I don't think St George's did. No, they didn't. They came out of it quite scot-free, which is good because it was their staff that told us to do it.
Yeah, yeah,
That would have been awkward.
very.
But yeah, but obviously Brighton Man was on there on quite a few counts of negligence. So we then went to the NHS with this, and the legal team were like, it should be pretty good because we've got an expert that agrees with you, and all they would be doing is trying to get an expert to argue with somebody at the same level. So it's like if our guy on our team is saying this is gross negligence, here are eight things or 9 things that you've done wrong, it's going to be really hard for a professional who's not biased to argue with his peer, basically. So further down the line, this went on, and then the NHS pleaded guilty to 6 out of 8 counts of negligence.
Wow. But
Including all of the stuff at Brighton, which is what the Ombudsman and Brighton had said they hadn't done. NHS were like, yeah, we absolutely fucked that one up. Which
wow.
I remember finding out. I was on my way to a boot camp, and I sat in the car and they were calling me, like the lawyers, and I was like, oh, like, because you don't, everything happens like behind the scenes, so you kind of only know top line information. You don't know day to day what's happening. And they literally called me and were like, are you sitting down? I was like, yes, I'm in my car. And they were like, you've won. They've pleaded guilty, and they listed everything they'd pleaded guilty to. And I burst into tears. And I'm quite emotionally void. Like, my dad says I'm stoic. I'm very British, don't show any emotion. And I bawled my eyes out I missed my entire boot camp. I literally sat in my car watching them work out, sobbing uncontrollably, calling my husband, calling his parents, calling my parents. Just, it was like this insane weight that I'd been carrying for years, not realizing that's what it was, left me. And honestly, like, the boot camp man came over to the car and was like, are you okay? And I was like, I couldn't even, like, I could not. He was literally like, oh my god, like, what is happening?
Did he think it was him? Do you think it's only a boot camp? You don't need to worry. It's only a boot
It's
camp.
not even that cold today, Hannah. Like, crack on. He was just like, what is going on? And like, it was absolute madness, the whole thing. And then, bless Jasper, we then had to go to court. But so basically, they wanted to pay us off so we wouldn't go to court, which is fine. But we had to go to, it was, I don't know what the technical term is. I think it was a Crown Court we went to, but it wasn't like, there wasn't a jury or anything. There was the guy in the wig, and there was my barrister who literally speaks in tongues. He was so delightful. He was brilliant with Jasper. My husband was away, and my parents are away, so my mother-in-law came as well. So it was the 2 of us and Jasper sat in this really tiny courtroom with our barrister, like a little junior person, and then I guess the NHS's guy. And honestly, the pair of all 3 of them, like the main guys, were speaking in tongues. I was sat there like trying to kind of keep up with what was happening. Jasper was obviously bored shitless. I just gave him my phone and he was playing on it. I was like, just don't make a sound.
Yeah.
But you're not allowed to like talk. You're not allowed. So they were like talking about me and I wasn't allowed to say anything. So then I like put my hand up because they were basically arguing over some point. And I put my hand up and they sort of looked at me and I was like, am I like, can I speak? Because it seems like you're second guessing what I'm thinking. And I'm right here. Like I can just
Yeah.
answer. So then like they had to ask me. No, I had to ask them to ask the judge's permission for the judge to tell them that I'm allowed to speak. And we're all 4 foot away from each other. It's like the weirdest. I don't know, the whole thing. It's just unlike anything I've ever done. And they were like, okay, yes, you may speak. So I was like, I don't know if I'm following this, but I think this is what you're kind of arguing over. And this is my opinion on it. Because they were basically, I think they were working out at this point, they had already pleaded guilty. So it was working out like, I guess the money side of things. And it was like what bits that have gone wrong equate to how much in general. And whether because like Jasper gets money from it and we get money as carers and as the people having to go through it, and then obviously the lawyers take everything else.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
Considerably more than both of us put together. And I think they were arguing on what kind of trust I wanted Jasper's money to go into or something. So I was literally like, if I'm following, like, this is where we're at, this is what I want, just for clarity, like I'm saying what I want. If that's possible, then that's what I want. I want him to get it when he's 18, ideally when he's 21, but it has to be 18. And they were like, oh yes, and like kind of half laughed, like being like, ha, 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 and then go back to this like super formal. It was the whole thing was weird. But then our barrister afterwards was like, that is hilarious. Like I've never known anyone to kind of get involved. And I was like, but it's so weird. You're literally talking about me, second guessing my thoughts, and I'm sat 2 seats away from you. So he was lovely, bless him. I never saw him again. I don't know who he was. He just came out of nowhere from our lawyers and then disappeared off again. But yeah, then it just went through and the lawyers were like, yep, give us your bank details. Here's a trust set up for Jasper. So they paid, I can tell you how much. It was not very exciting, but I think he got, I think like 16 grand, maybe around that. I can't remember. That's in a savings trust thing for him. It gets money on it every month or whatever, like a savings account,
like an
type
ISA
thing.
or something.
Yeah. So he's got one of those, which is run by the court. So it's in the court's funds that when he's 18, he can have access to. But at that point, I think we can then, with his permission at that stage, ask them to keep hold of it a bit longer or take it out and put it, because I don't want him to have the money when he's 18. Then we got paid. So we got paid, I think we got 11,000 for me and John. And that just got paid into our account. And then I think our legal team got something like 56,000 or thereabouts. They got obviously considerably more than us. And it was because it was a no win, no fee. They had to pay the barrister and the guy from Southampton. They would charge us like 40 quid to send an email. So
yes.
But yes. I was like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. I want Jasper to have something out of this. I don't care if we get anything out of this. I don't really give a shit how much the lawyers take. Like, what I want is the apology. And then we did then get a full-blown apology on behalf of the NHS plus from Brighton, saying that they're really sorry that these things have happened. They will learn from these mistakes. They will second guess when things happen like this again. They're so sorry for their part in it. And I was literally like, you could have saved, number one, all of our time, all of this money, all of this effort, if you had just said sorry 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But that's kind of then, yeah, how it ended, and that's it. It means so things like we had got Jasper's disability living allowance. We had that when he had a stoma, I think. And that's another weird government thing where we had
Mm.
applied for it on recommendation of the hospital. The DLA said no, he doesn't have any additional care to a normal child. I was like, are you mental? I had then argued, as apparently is my thing, and I'd sent loads of pictures of his prolapses and stuff, and I'd enclosed it being like, you know, this is quite graphic, but if you want me to show you that he's not a normal child, open this. And then we got the highest amount of disability living allowance. And I was like, oh, that's so weird that you went from no, there's nothing wrong with him to holy shit, we're so sorry. Which again, I think is just people money saving.
Yeah.
And one of the court things was that we then had to pay all of that back. And I was like, no, we don't. And even the lawyers were like, oh, yeah, you do, because it's linked to the case. And I was like, no, that money was because he has Hirschsprungs and a stoma. We have realized numerous times that is to do with Hirschsprungs. That is not to do with late diagnosis.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's like saying someone is wheelchair bound and then, or somebody's, broken their wrist. You wouldn't get DLA for that, but you know what I mean? Someone's broken their wrist, but then they get hit by a bus and are in a wheelchair, but you can't help them because they broke their wrist. Like that makes, like, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So then the lawyers went back to the NHS and were like, no, like one of the things that they tried to sue them for, which I argued so many times not to, was the fact that he had a stoma, and the NHS had pushed back. And that's one thing they weren't guilty of, obviously, is that he had a stoma. So I was like, so hold on, why are we paying you money for the fact that the government paid because he had a stoma? Like you're
It doesn't make any
contradicting
sense.
yourself. So either you're guilty and you have to give us more money, or you're not guilty and we don't pay that back. So
let me guess. They very quickly went to, we're not guilty.
Yeah, weirdly they did. Yeah, so there was a bit of an argument about that. And yeah, other than that, that was kind of it, done and dusted. And we haven't heard anything, had to do anything since. It's just that's how it is. It does mean that anything that happens from that point onwards to him that's linked to a late diagnosis, which it's hard to know if it is or not with Hirschsprung's, but we can't sue them a second time. And I was like, well, they've said sorry. I don't really care. They've kind of, that what I wanted has happened. But yeah, that was the roller coaster of suing the NHS.
Yeah, and all of this in terms of time, how long did sort of from start to finish, how long did that all take?
So the legal stuff, I would say, was from him being 2.5 was when, or maybe even 3 when I first started it, and it finished when he was 5 and a bit. So a good 2 and a bit years.
Yeah, and
which was
and
a lot.
all of this would have been avoided had there just been some accountability.
Yeah.
And some honesty. I think that's the other word I think that needs to be mentioned. We can have accountability, we can have people saying sorry and people apologizing and whatever, but just some honesty, just some we got it wrong and we are very, very sorry, and we we will never let this happen again. We will learn from it, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And it would have been avoided.
So when I said that to my dad, because he worked not for the NHS, but he worked for the government in a different capacity, and he was like, they will never say sorry because that's showing you that they were guilty of something, and then you will sue them because they did something wrong. And I was like, it's such a backwards way of doing it, because maybe that is the case for some people, but for some people like me, all I want is that. So it's like
So they probably, again, it may be the case or may not have been the case, may have known they were wrong. I mean, like you said, it is so, the way you've described it is so black and white.
Clear. Yeah.
And I guess sometimes as well, when you are seeing something that is so blatantly obvious, you can then start to question and go, am I the one that's wrong?
Yeah.
Am I going mad a
I
little
mean,
bit?
you're going mad, yeah. And especially because our legal team weren't the best.
Mm.
It was like I second guessed myself quite a lot, and like it was very stressful. It was quite all consuming. Firstly, plus you have a newborn baby, you still have a kid that needs care. It's COVID times. Then you're dealing with this, and I kind of felt, which I'm sure a lot of Hirschsprung's people feel, is that you're constantly trying to really dumb it down so that people understand what's going on. And I felt like that with anyone that I spoke to, really, plus with our legal team. And it was like, just fucking Google before you
Yeah.
talk to me. Like, just think about what we've already, and like they had staff changes in that time, and my case kept getting given to someone else who would then make the same mistakes as the last two people. So it was just like, is there like a handover process here, guys?
Could
Like,
be.
come
Yeah.
on. Like, you're being paid an awful lot of money and you're not doing very much.
Mhm. Yes.
But yeah, it was a big undertaking, definitely. And I think it is in, like, we know NHS is flawed in many ways, and I think the system is flawed, but also I think it is the thing that really got me was that the ombudsman, who is meant to, be unbiased and all of this, the ombudsman had pushed back, and I was like, you would have seen what I saw, and you've pushed back, and it just, at the end of the day, everyone needs to make money, don't they? And I just think the same with the DLA people, the same with the NHS. Push back, and hope they go away. And
Mm.
I think a lot of the time people would take what the ombudsman or what the team in Brighton had said and been like, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong, and kind of not taking it further. And with the DLA being told, no, your kid's absolutely fine, not pushing back. And therefore they've saved themselves some cash. It's like all of these things, I think, sadly, in as much as in life, people think about it money wise rather than human to human.
Yeah.
And actually, it could have been nipped in the bud years prior with no financial numerification, neither parties, no one going to court, nothing, none of this happening, had there have just been some kind of human being like, I get it, like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Um, Even like I was willing to go in and be like, this is our case, or like this is what happened to us, like, and like working with them. Like, I don't mind sitting in a room with that man that I hate, that I feel ruined my child's life. Okay, a bit dramatic, but like, I don't mind being put in a room with him. And I'd even said to my dad, I was like, if I go in a room with him, will you come with me and be like, because my dad's super calm and very like articulate. And I was like, would you come with me? And like, I'm more than happy to kind of workshop with them. Okay, if this happens again, like, what can you guys do from your side? Because this is kind of where we were at, and like, work with them in some capacity to make sure it doesn't happen again. And like, obviously Brighton said no, and our legal team were like, no, they won't do that. And I was like, can we ask? Like, I genuinely, like, I think that is more valuable, is that the word? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
valuable
Yeah.
for everyone involved than you just giving us some money and saying sorry.
Yeah.
like like can we do something that is a bit more proactive? But
It's
no
not how
is
it
the answer.
works, unfortunately.
No,
It's
I don't think
just
they give a shit. I think they're busy and they're like, yeah, whatever, little lady.
yeah. They yeah. Not that's not how legal works. It's not how
No,
legal works at all. And just as
which is
we sort
mad.
of round towards the end, how do you feel about the whole process now? Sort of looking back on it, with it being sort of a few years ago now. How do you view the process? Do you view it differently when you were going through it than you do now, or is it how has that changed?
Good question. Do I view it differently? Probably not. I would hope I never have to do it again.
Yeah, yeah, I can
um
imagine that.
I'm very aware, I suppose, of documenting things. Like, I chat shit on Instagram all the time, or being I'm very communicative person, whereas like my husband isn't. He's more of a closed book guy. I'm very open, very like I'll tell anyone anything that they want to know. Like I don't really care. And actually that was a really beneficial thing. So I think for me, like just in life, it's always like just I think communication for anyone is really important. And I also think standing up for yourself and certainly for your kids when they don't have the voice to do it, there is nothing more important to me. And having done that, like when either of my kids are ill, obviously I have a very high threshold for what requires a hospital visit versus what can I do at home. But it's like I know at what point do I need to kick up a fuss. And what has been really good is that weirdly in our village there is another baby that has Hirschsprung's that I mentioned. Like we
Yeah.
their doula is my friend's sister, so we kind of like I know the family. I know Albie. I've met them. I've chatted to the mum loads. In fact, we were talking about your podcast,
Yes, we were. Yes.
and she is like it's just so nice having someone to talk to. And I was like, communication again is so important, and this is where we're at. And there's another, lady that reached out to me on Instagram and was like, this is where we're at. It's not Hirschsprung's, but we don't quite know what it is. But she was like, this is happening. Like, is this normal? Is this bad? And it's like, document everything, write everything down, text anyone, anything, because you've got time and date stamps. All of these messages to me, keep them. Like, this is all really important for you. And you just need to always advocate for your child. And if something, I think I've learned that where I'm super chilled and kind of don't want to impose, don't want to cause a fuss, don't want to, there's always somebody more important, or like somebody that needs more help, or somebody that's a higher priority than you or your child. And it's like that is all well and good, but your child does not need to be nil by mouth lying on a bed for 2 weeks. Like you can kick up a fuss before then. And I think now we've changed as parents. Actually, we're still super chilled. Like our kids are feral, everything's fine. But like at Jasper at school, for example, there was one occasion where a teacher told him he couldn't go to the toilet because there was no pass available, and like he can go to the toilet at any point. It is in his EHCP, like it's a rule. But it was a new member of staff who she didn't know, and he had an accident. And there's not me being all like, oh, it's okay, don't worry, da da da. I was literally like, this is what we need to do. Do you need St. George's to teach you this? Like, what can I do to ensure this does not happen ever again? And they were literally like, oh, I'm so sorry. But it won't happen again.
No.
And it's like, I think that's how things have changed. It's just that I'm a bit more to the point, direct, still lovely and friendly and, nice around the edges, but don't fuck with my kids, I think is the moral of the story, because I will do everything in my power to take you down.
Absolutely. I think we
Yeah,
need.
just like a bad.
I think we'll end on that point. What a fantastic little saying to don't fuck with my kids. Fantastic. We'll end on that. Thank you
Oh
so
dear.
so much for this.
No worries.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure, Tom.